I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Dr. Kim Davis. Dr. Davis joins us from beautiful Pearl Harbor today. Kim is a naval officer and board-certified ophthalmologist. This spring, she was recognized as the American Hospital Association Federal Healthcare Executive of the Year. Over a 31-year career, she has served in various positions and locations across the globe, supporting pandemic response, warfighter readiness, humanitarian assistance, and partner nation preparedness. Her proudest contributions have been reversing blindness abroad and encouraging diverse young people to enter STEM fields. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you very much, Kara. I really appreciate the opportunity to join your podcast. Before we get started, I just need to make a quick disclaimer that any comments that I make today are mine alone and do not represent the views of the United States government.
Well, thank you for that. And I am so honored to have you on the show today. So thank you. Why don't you tell us, you have a very impressive bio here, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I am, as you said, I'm in the Navy, and I have been a career professional doing both medicine and healthcare administration. I'm an educator. I'm also a mom and a wife and a reader.
That's wonderful. And I imagine over the course of your career that you have worn many hats, it sounds like, as well.
Definitely. As I was kind of reflecting a little bit on reading, I have to tell you that so much of the time associated with books initially was hardcore science books, right? Very dense material that, we had to memorize, and some of it wasn't very fun.
Absolutely. I remember being in grad school and I could not allow myself to read a leisure book because I knew that that would be what I would be drawn towards instead of the scientific, the dry textbook. I was like, nope, if I even pick up a leisure book, I'm going to get hooked in that story and that's all I'm going to want to read. So I would ban myself from leisure reading for the entire semester until we would get to Christmas break or whatever it would be. And I'm like, okay, I can pick up a leisure book for 3 weeks. So how much can I get in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, so you're in beautiful Honolulu now.
Yes, we sure are. It's wonderful. They say, home is where the Navy sends you. And we have really, really had an amazing career. This is our second time to be here. And we've gotten to be in really wonderful places like Puerto Rico and Annapolis and San Diego. And it's amazing to be here in Pearl Harbor, where we're surrounded by so much of our nation's history.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a magical place for sure. That was our first duty station that we landed on. And I felt incredibly lucky to be everybody's like, how did you get Honolulu for your first place to go? And it was just luck of the draw, really. I mean, Eric, my husband, didn't really know what he was doing. It just fell in our lap that it was available and timing worked out. But yeah, we've been very fortunate, I feel like, with sunny locations. We did 1 year in Bremerton. Gosh, is it 2 years ago now? And it felt like a shock because I'm like, for almost 10 years, we've been living in sunny, remotely mild weather places. And I'm like, oh, Bremerton is really rough.
Yes, but at least you have water. Almost everywhere the Navy can send you, you have beautiful water. So
Yes.
great views.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people and they say, oh, at least you have good duty stations with the Navy. And I'm like, I mean, I guess I've never thought about it in the grand scheme, but yes, it has worked out very well. So, with your job, I imagine that you are incredibly busy. So how do you find time to fit in reading into your life?
So, I would say that's varied over the course of my adult life. I remember it's probably a decade ago now, but a very busy time. And I happened to be in our hospital library, and I saw that they had books on CD, if you can remember that, right? Like you pick these things up. And I thought, oh my goodness, I could get some books on CD. And I really started that with some leadership books. And then I started, picking up some books that were just fun reads. And that was the first time that I did any audiobooks. And it was fascinating to me with the basically actors that you would have on there. Sometimes they even had sound effects and things like that. I remember Water for Elephants and several Janet Ivanovich books that were just hugely fun. So I really think that's the point in my life where I started reading, or enjoying books again for leisure. And since then, I've not wanted to stop. I prefer to read books, paper books, and I always read before bed. I like to read on weekends. That is just one of my biggest guilty pleasures, is just time alone with the dog by my side and birds chirping, and just diving into another period in time, or peeling back a curtain to some, a fascinating life or adventure or something like that.
Yeah, it sounds like it really fills your cup, which I imagine in your busyness, you need to find ways to do that as well.
Absolutely.
Is your husband a reader?
He is. He
Okay.
tends to read more, I would say, history, less fiction than I do. If I get a book that I think he'll like, I try to kind of stick it over on his nightstand and see if he'll bite. But yes, mostly his reads are historic, in particular on World War II.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering because you're like, oh, it's my guilty pleasure on the weekend. So I'm like, does he understand the draw of books? But if he's a reader as well, then he absolutely does.
Yes.
So, and then you've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but what type of genres do you enjoy when you read?
So really several different types of books that I enjoy. My husband jokes that my nightstand is a hazard zone, because at any one time there are no less than probably three or four. I love reading leadership books, and I love hearing other people's stories. And so I always have one of those on my nightstand. And then I typically also will have some type of book that deals with uh, history, and it can be historic fiction, or an actual account, a true account, and
Okay.
then some type of usually fun. Sometimes I call them throwaways, but just something fun and lighthearted, that might be more that you read on someone's book club list, or something like that.
Yeah.
And even those I find great value in, and partially because it then creates a discussion around a topic that you can sort of share with peers, and some of those become movies and things like that.
Yeah, it's almost like the pop culture of books,
Pop
right?
culture, yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
And I always think of those like lighthearted reads as a palate cleanser too. Like between the personal development or the leaderships or maybe the heavier books you might be reading, it's a nice little like, okay, give me something quick that I can get through and feel like I get through the story, and then I'm ready
Yes.
for another like deeper dive or a heavier read. But you got to have a variety. And so thank you for sharing that.
You definitely do. Sometimes it starts to wear on you what you're reading about. And so again, some type of escape that's funny, or not so serious, is really delightful.
Yeah, I've recently been exploring the idea of almost like a book hangover where I've read
Mhm.
such a good book that it's like it's taking up so much space and rent in my head that I like cannot get it out. So I cannot move on to something else because I'm like, well, nothing else is just ever going to be as good, which is totally not true. But I'm like, it's kind of like a book hangover. Like you just can't get it out, get it out of there. But I've
Yes.
been thinking maybe putting in these kind of, lighthearted fun reads in between when I feel like that would probably be a good way to break that cycle a little bit.
We all need it. I remember reading Cutting for Stone years ago, and it's a tremendous book, but
Yeah.
you talk about a powerful story that sticks with you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Have you read his new one yet?
No, not yet. I have it in
Okay.
my cart. Yeah, I
Okay.
have I
It's
have it in my
very
shopping cart.
lengthy, I
It
think.
is.
Yeah. So I was like, but I have
That's
not.
kept me from buying it and carrying it on an airplane. Yes.
Yeah, because I think it's like 800 pages or something. But after reading Cutting for Stone, I'm like, I would totally try another one of his. That was such a wonderful book.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Well, and you have been so gracious to prepare a book flight for us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how the books pair together?
Absolutely. So, it was really interesting as I heard about this project that you have with the pairing of books. I never really thought about that before, right? Like, is there a certain genre, or are there books that kind of fill that niche that is really important to me as a person? And the books that I selected for this flight all have to do with the contributions of women during World War II.
Okay.
Many of these very young women were not even able to talk about the work that they did. And the contributions were exceptionally noteworthy. And I loved the way for at least two of these, that our leaders realized that we needed to kind of harness the talent of everyone, right? So
Yeah.
this is that diversity piece, and that we're better with everyone. And yes, it was. I actually had probably half a dozen. I had to kind of start cutting them back because
Yeah.
a lot of books that are on the same topic. So I picked a few of my favorites.
Yeah, I find that I had Eric interview me for an episode like early on when I was still trying to like have regular guests and have regular episodes. So I was like, well, could you interview me? And I think it would be fun to switch roles too, just to understand what my guests go through. And I had two books right away that paired together, but then it was like, it was so hard to figure out which would be the third book to pair in that because I'm like, well, there's like five options. It could be. But it was a fun way to put myself in the hot seat as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what is the first book of the pairing today?
So the first book is Girls of the Atomic City by Denise Kernan. And I'll tell you, this one caught my eye as I was traveling through the Memphis airport. I tend to like to explore the book kiosks and kind of flip through and see what they have featured. And the reason this was interesting to me is that the Atomic City, or Oak Ridge, Tennessee, took place during World War II, and it was not that far from this area that I've traveled several times. Basically, the government purchased about 60,000 acres, and they set up a city complete with obviously work buildings, but also homes, restaurants, movie theaters, grocery stores, etc., and advertised throughout the country that we need your help to bring a speedy and victorious end to the war.
Okay.
And so young women came really from all over, and they were basically told, don't ask why. This is your job. Don't ask why. And they had all different skill sets. So you had, women that were secretaries, you had scientists, you had epidemiologists, you had nurses, and they worked in separate facilities, basically making components for the atomic bombs. And
Okay.
so it was just fascinating how they came together at this time. And I've thought since then, gosh, in the age of technology, with the ability to text and post things instantly, like this would never have worked, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even there were like spies, and you had to be very careful with, people, I would say, sort of guarding the passage of information is what I would say. So that, you kind of felt like you were always being watched. Folks weren't able to tell families away what they did. And it really wasn't until the bombs had been dropped that ended the World War II. It ended World War II, and about 200,000 people, had perished in that.
Yeah.
That these folks understood the contributions they made, and it was fascinating to me as well, the just sort of the mix of emotion, right? That folks had when they realized what they contributed to.
Yeah.
I think many of them felt that, things could have been a lot worse had they not been part of that. But at the same time, that was then something that
Yeah.
many of them carried, you know, basically, for the rest of their adult lives, and not able to talk to many other people about it.
Yeah, I have the chills as you're telling that about just the emotions that would be behind that, right? Of the, yes, we're saving, stopping the war, but then the loss of life on the back end, right? That dichotomy of if you look at both sides of that.
Absolutely.
And were they able to come and go because it was so secretive, or did they have to stay?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's, my understanding from the book that they were pretty much, that was where they lived now, kind of a
Yeah.
thing, right? And so they were able to write letters, but the folks who received their letters basically said, don't bother, because everything you write is blacked out.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of their mail was censored. And there was even a section in there where they talked about, folks needing medical care. And essentially, the care that they got was what was available there in Oak Ridge. And they really weren't able to go off because they were afraid that the secrets would be revealed. And
Yeah.
again, each of these women knew only what they were working on, right? But they were concerned that if they talked to somebody, from the shop next door or out in town, that people would start to put things together. As it was, there were trains that would go into this city full, and nothing ever came out, right? So it was that
Wow.
other thing too, about they're making something,
Yeah.
but we just don't know what it is. So a big veil of secrecy.
Yeah. Wow. And I feel like when you read these books in World War II, I feel like everything is like playing on like the patriotism of people, right? Like you're doing this for the victory, right? Like you're minimal information, but it's for the victory of our country, right? And they're just playing into that, and that's the motivation they're using. Um, and so that's very interesting. And I just can't even imagine. I'm like trying to put myself in their shoes, and that's why I love reading, is for that exact reason, is to put myself in someone else's shoes in a life that I will never experience because I didn't live in the 1940s. But to think, would I respond the same way if I was faced with the situations, or what would I be feeling? Seeing
Absolutely.
these trains come in, I don't really know what's going on. I can't talk to the people next to me, and I'm like living in a bubble of my, shop, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that made this book feel a lot more personal as well is that the author did extensive research and then followed some of the key characters. So I remember Celia, one of the young girls, she basically said, none of the girls would complain about secrecy. Complaining was not in fashion. In 1943, not with so many sacrifices being made, thousands of miles away, so much loss of life and family, right? Like, how could anyone with a good job complain?
Yeah.
And I agree, it was just a unique time.
Wow. Wow, that sounds wonderful. And this was one of the nonfiction books, correct?
It is,
Okay.
yes, it absolutely was. So yeah, a great read that I would highly recommend.
Wonderful. Okay, so that was Girls of the Atomic City by Denise Kiernan. And then what's the second book of the pairing?
So the second book, excuse me, is entitled Code Girls, and it's by Lisa Mundy. And this book was likewise absolutely fascinating. And essentially, with the majority of our nation's men called to don the uniform during World War II, recruiters began to recognize there was a need for female talent. And so, their mantra was kind of come at once, we could use you in Washington, D.C. So the Navy started to look at Ivy League colleges, and they started with professors that were at these universities and asked, who are your best students in math and science, music, and language? And then once those young women were identified, they simply were asked two questions, and I got a kick out of this. So the first one was, do you like crossword puzzles? And the second was, are you engaged to be married? And so, again, a different time, right? So
Yeah.
the students, who responded appropriately to those questions were kind of put in round two. And then they were tested. And then if they passed high enough, they were invited essentially to train with the sharpest minds in code breaking. And those things were in Washington, D.C. And in order to support this code breaking mission, they had to basically claim certain buildings. Arlington Hall, for example, had been a 2-year finishing school for girls, and that ended up being the main headquarters of the Army detachment there. And the Army was interesting as well, because unlike the Northeast that the Navy recruited from, they actually recruited math and science teachers from the Midwest.
Okay.
And so that I thought was pretty cool. And in total, there were about 10,000 women
Wow.
sworn to secrecy. And essentially, for the most part, their families thought, they were there working as simple secretaries. They downplay their roles and say, I sharpen pencils and do typing, and their families were none the wiser.
Yeah. Which again, if you think about like you could never do that in 2023 today. Like people would be like, no, you're like putting down the woman, right? Like you can't just be sharpening pencils, right? I mean, that would be that you couldn't use that as a shield, I think, in today's age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, similar to the women, that we spoke about in Girls of the Atomic City in Oak Ridge, these code breakers, they couldn't speak of anything that they did in their section even, right? And so it was really fascinating. I learned a lot about code breaking in this book, and sort of understanding a little bit of secret message systems, that exist. And, some of that was pretty interesting, like codes, for example, they replace words and phrases with a collection of numbers or letters, whereas you had ciphers, and that was like a one-on-one substitution for like a
Oh,
letter or a
okay.
number. So it was pretty interesting to see which sections the women would be in, and you definitely could see how that love for puzzle solving would come in handy.
That is really cool. I love books that you're learning, right? And this is why I love historical fiction because I'm learning, at least I'm learning about the time period, but it sounds like you're learning all this about the codes and the ciphers as well, which is really neat.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and the ciphers too, it was pretty cool. They actually ended up recreating some of these. So the purple cipher machine, they actually called that magic, and that was for the Pacific. And then they also had these Enigma systems, which were to break codes for the U-boats, the
Wow.
German U-boats.
So they all stayed locally though here and or not locally, but in the United States. They weren't like sent off.
The women in this particular book, yes, but
Okay.
there may have been women doing things, in US women in other parts of the world as well.
Okay. Yeah, because I know I've read one. I believe it's The Rose Code. Have you read that one?
I am not.
Okay, it's by Kate Quinn. She's actually a Navy spouse, which I learned.
I really didn't know
But
that.
I believe that it was out of the UK. It was women out of the UK, but they were sent like into France to send coded messages like locally to destroy bridges or to stop the Nazi movement through France. So they were also like taught code and all of that, but they were sent to the, front lines there.
Wow.
So it is a very good read if you're looking for another one around coding. And
That's good. I need
yeah.
more.
And I didn't learn as much, I think, about like coding and ciphers, but it's historical fiction. It definitely was a very moving story. So
That's fantastic.
okay, sorry, I totally digressed. Do you have anything else you'd
No.
like to add about Code Girls?
Well, you know, the interesting thing was that these women, at the conclusion of the war, they kept all of this secret, all of this work that they did. So unlike, in the Girls of the Atomic City, when it was finally announced, what they had been a part of, right? It was a little bit, more known of Oak Ridge's participation. These women, some of them did stay, many of them were part of the waves, right? Like for the Navy.
Sure.
Others went into kind of related fields, but some, maybe stopped working and, or went into totally different fields. And so, I would just encourage any of your listeners to, maybe look into this a little more, because there are some fascinating videos that they were able to tape at the end of some of these women's lives, right? 70 years later,
Yeah.
when this was finally, declassified. And even after it was declassified, the women, many of them held on to this and felt it was some type of a betrayal to do it. And, I just loved the author called these Code Girls the hidden figures of the greatest generation.
Yeah. Yeah. And could you imagine having that whole secret life?
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
I'm not very good at keeping secrets. I don't know that I'd be very good at that.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. I'm definitely adding this to my TBR as well as to go look at some of these videos with the women because that would be cool to see their actual tape, their footage. That is
Yes.
something that impresses me so much with historical fiction as well. I've had some authors of historical fiction on the show and how much time, I mean, they spend almost 3 years doing just research and then how to
Absolutely.
synthesize this into a novel that we can digest and enjoy. I find that so impressive that what these authors can do.
Absolutely. Me too.
Yeah. So, okay, well, that was Code Girls by Liza Mundy. And then what is the last book of the pairing today?
So the last book is called The Invisible Woman, and it's by Erica Roebuck. And I picked this one. This is a historic fiction, so it's the first historic fiction of the group. And one thing that I thought was really pretty cool. This book was a selection from a book club I participate remotely in
Okay.
Annapolis, Maryland, since our time of being stationed there.
Love
And the
that.
author is actually from Annapolis.
Okay.
And this was the first time that I knew that authors would sometimes participate in book clubs, which I thought was
Yes.
just so cool.
So
So
fun.
she actually came to the book club and interacted with the readers. I was remote at the time, and it was just so neat to be able to connect through video to see it as well, which was super great. So this book is an account of Virginia Hall, and she was essentially a hero who wanted to remain behind the scenes and out of the spotlight. And it turns out she was actually the most highly decorated female civilian of World War II.
Wow. Wow. Chills again. Wow.
I know, exactly. So she was born into a family of privilege, and she had to find her own way to service. She really wanted to serve. She had applied and tried to work for the government, and she was initially turned down. And finally, she got hired as a clerk for the U.S. consulate office in Turkey. And then when World War II broke out, she started driving ambulances over there. And, just again, kind of like you and I talked about earlier, right? Like, how can I help?
Yeah.
It when she was in Turkey, very early on, she was involved in a hunting accident where she actually shot her foot and ended up with a gangrenous toe and limb, and actually ended up, you'll be interested as a physical therapist, she was actually ended up with an amputation.
Wow.
And in those days, of course, they don't have the incredible prostheses that our, warfighters and others have today. So that was one of her things, is that she had this limp. She actually, even named her prosthesis and all these things. So she was very distinguishable from that.
Okay.
She anyway, so she, because of that injury, they then said that she was ineligible to be a diplomat at the State Department, even though that was something that she really aspired to. So it ended up being this really chance meeting that somebody kind of recognized her brilliance and recruited her as a spy.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed that they would be like, okay, you could be the spy with the limp, because you would think that that would be a
Right.
giveaway, right? Of,
Yes. Well, and that, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was something that this really speaks to this woman's commitment as well. So she decided to disguise, or her team decided to have her disguise as an older woman. And so she actually used that gait. She created it into like a older person's, like, kind of hobble, is how she disguised it. She became very facile in, makeup, and created wrinkles. She dyed her hair and even went as far as filing her teeth. Can you
wow.
imagine? This young woman born to privilege files
Yeah.
her teeth to make her look more like a peasant.
Wow.
Yes. So she was advertised widely, her face, as being, the basically, sort of like most wanted
Okay.
across France, but nobody could find her
Yeah.
because she was hidden in plain sight.
Wow. And like you said, just that level of commitment. That's all that's going through my head, is her commitment to her job. And
Absolutely.
that's really wonderful. So it goes through some of, like, I'm assuming, do they call it missions in the book? I'm looking for the right term, but
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of what she did too was behind the scenes. It was interesting. The author, like you said, did extensive research, and there wasn't a lot. Many of her family members didn't even know much about her.
okay.
And so part of the historic fiction, the author created some relationships and other things so that you could understand a little bit more about her kind of stoic personality. And much of what they described her helping with was getting much needed supplies to the French resistance, and putting herself in jeopardy. And Yeah, it was amazing. It reminded me a little bit of some other books that I'm sure you and your listeners enjoyed, like the Nightingale,
Yeah.
the Alice Network, some of those other things. But yeah, so it does take you through, again, some of these adventures that she had, and what she was willing to risk.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like a great book and an impressive lady for sure. Okay, so that was The Invisible Woman by Erica Roebuck. So I've been sitting here thinking, as you've been talking a little bit, about a dessert pairing for you as a thank you for coming on the show. And I actually just finished this week. It's called The Little Wartime Library. Have you read this?
I have not.
Okay, so I was going through my mind. I'm like, I don't know if I've read a lot of World War II historical fiction, but I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head based in the US. So, but this features women in London. And what happened is they were children's librarians when the war started. And the library that they were working at, it had a beautiful glass ceiling in it. It gets bombed. And so they start taking, like, it wasn't recommended by the government there, but they start taking all these books down to the tube stations, right? Because this was where everybody was going at night, right? To avoid the air raids and the blitz and everything that was going on. People were like living in these tube stations. So they decided to really make social life down in these tube stations. And because
Wow.
they were children's librarians, they really wanted to focus on, especially they're called the tube rats in the book, but the children that are living down in there, and just to give them a childhood. And so
Wow.
that kind of became their mission. They took all of these books that weren't blasted from the bomb, brought them down to the tube station. They built this like the way they talk about it's a true story, but this like flimsy library with like plywood to create this downstairs. And they had children's story hour every single night because again they're trying to make this normal for children, right? And as
Yeah.
normal as you can be when you're living in a tube station
Absolutely.
overnight. But really the the British government starts to get behind this project, and so they really started to recognize what books and novels could do for people in these times of tragedy, right? And this trauma and everything that's occurring around them, how it could take people out of their circumstances, right? And it could give them a different reality. So it talks about there's two main characters essentially. And it goes through their story. And one is the head librarian. She becomes the head librarian because, like you said, now all the men are off to war. So she becomes a head librarian, and it's like under the circumstance of like, well, when the men come back, I'm just going to go back to being the children's librarian, right? But she finds that she just falls in love with this, and she does such a good job with it that she, read the story and you'll kind of find out what happens. But there was this quote that I absolutely loved in here. And so it's books in wartime can be a refuge into which we make our way to escape the slings and arrows of outrageous conflict. Books can be a storehouse from which to draw sure knowledge and rich emotion to clarify our minds and strengthen our souls for the tasks to which we have set our hand. And I just love that. I was like, oh, I got to add that to
Wow.
my quote book.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I love the dessert pairing.
Yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful.
It's a book about books. And so I think as readers, like we can totally appreciate that. But it's historical fiction, it's female main characters, and they're strong women, and they are fighting for these children and what they're providing for these people because they're getting a lot of flack from the admin people at first before they recognize what a beautiful thing it is they have created. And it's based off a true story. She has interviewed a lot of women that lived in this. I think it was more of like a working class neighborhood of London. So it was a maybe more blue collar neighborhood. And so these people didn't have much, but they realized what books brought to these people. And it just is a really beautiful story. It's a thicker book, but it's worth the read, and it's a quick one. It's almost 450 pages in paperback, but it was a lovely read. So
Wonderful.
I'd highly recommend that. So that was The Little Wartime Library, and that's by Kate Thompson. Okay, so the last thing I like to do on the show is end with what I call our bonus pairings, which are just a speed round of questions, so you can answer these really quick. So, where is your favorite place to read?
My favorite place to read is right now on my back porch. It's a comfortable spot, especially as you know, in Hawaii, it's comfortable outside from a temperature standpoint. There's a breeze, but not too much breeze to crinkle pages and things like that. And you hear birds, the air smells beautiful with the
Yes.
flowers and everything like that. We've got a nice cover. It's fun to have my golden doodle by my side as well. So I, again, get to cuddle with him and really just, it's grounding.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember thinking that I always thought where I grew up in Chicago, and I was like, oh, blue skies, right? And I'm like, wow, I've never seen a blue sky until I lived in Hawaii. Like it was totally different. Yeah.
Yes. And if it does rain, it doesn't last long, and it's usually sunny when it is raining. And so there's gorgeous rainbow.
Yeah.
Yes, I was walking home from work the other day. There was a whole arc rainbow over my building.
So
Just
cool.
where does that happen?
Yeah.
Here.
Liquid sunshine.
It is. That's what we call it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yes, lovely. That sounds like you've just transported me. I need to go back. Okay, and then what is one book you have read that has changed your life?
Oh goodness. I will, with that, I'm going to pick a leadership book if that's
Okay,
okay.
please do.
Um, so a leadership book that I've really enjoyed is called The 360-Degree Leader.
Okay.
And at a couple of the various duty stations that I've had, that is one of the first books that I recommend that people read. And what I like so much about it is that it is it has the reader start with sort of a kind of a self-assessment, right?
Okay.
And so you first have to understand yourself, and then you need to get good at leading across, meaning connecting with your peers. You need to lead up and inform your boss, and make sure that you are fulfilling what they need from you, right? Kind of that dynamic uh, interaction. And then the last part of it is the leading down part, which I think as
Okay.
leaders sometimes, that's, I think, sometimes how people envision a leader, right? Somebody telling people what to do. And it's really the kind of the opposite, right? It should be structured in a very different way. So we've had some great leadership discussions with that. The book is by John Maxwell, by the way.
Okay.
So that one, again, it was one of the first leadership books that I read, and it I think really set a foundation for how I approach leadership.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. I've definitely heard of John Maxwell. I've read a few of his, but I have not read that one. But that sounds like it'd be really wonderful.
Yeah, the subtitle is Developing Your Influence from Anywhere in the Organization. I think that's the other thing too. You don't need a title to be a leader.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that's right. As a natural leader, right, you kind of shine anyways without trying.
Absolutely.
You probably
The
know more about that than me. I'm the leader of my family.
best.
Okay. And then do you prefer audio or hard copy books?
So I love a hard copy book, and I will tell you, I also love a hard cover if I can. Paperback is okay, especially if I'm traveling, but I really like a hard cover, and I think they're called deckled pages. Those wonderful old looking irregular pages.
Oh, yeah. With the edge, right? The like
The
edges.
texture is so great. And one of my daughters actually crocheted me just a beautiful bookmark that it looks like a stem and a leaf. And I like to kind of track my progress, through the book.
Yeah.
So there's something about paper. I will say that the technology's gotten a lot better. I've seen recently how you can change the yellow in the pages, the font, the contrast. But it wasn't always like that. It seems some of the books were, the digital books or e-readers were not that hot. And like I shared earlier, sometimes it is sometimes it's fun to listen. It almost reminds me like of a movie, though,
Yeah.
a movie book, right? But if and I think I heard you talk before about doing housework and listening to audiobooks or podcasts or things like that. And it's a good way to multitask.
Yeah.
But if I really want to sit down and enjoy something and only focus on that, it's a hardcover book with a little bit of texture.
Love it. I have one follow-up question because just last night I'm reading a hard copy book and the dust jacket kept like sliding off the book. Do you read with the dust jacket off or do you keep it on? Like, how do you read?
So I read with it on.
Okay.
Um, it's funny because, I know some people don't want them to get bent or messed up, but I always feel like the cover of a book is kind of vulnerable if it's that kind of canvasy stuff that I think could get greasy or whatever.
Sure.
So I read with the cover on, and if I don't have that fancy, embroidered bookmark or something else, I'll, even as I'm starting the book, use the book cover to kind of mark my page.
Okay.
The other thing I'll share is I tend to buy a lot of used books.
Okay.
And many of the used books, especially since I'm looking for hardcover, tend to be old library books. And so, as you know, like an old library book, it'll actually have the paper cover, but then plastic around it,
yeah.
and it's taped down. So even if you wanted to take the cover off, you'd be fighting against it.
Yeah, well, maybe that's what I need to do is tape the dust jacket on this book, because I ended up taking it off. I like put it nicely in my nightstand drawer because I was like, well, when I finish the book, I'll just put it back on and then
Yes.
it'll look all nice again. But like I was laying in bed too, so it was like I think I was like half falling asleep, but it kept slipping and I was like, okay, I'm done with the dust jacket. But I think it just goes to show how much I don't read, unless, like you said, it's a library book. I read paperback, but just not a ton of hardcover. And I was like, this is driving me nuts tonight. So, okay. And then last question, what are you reading next?
Oh, goodness. What am I reading? So I will tell you what I'm reading currently.
Okay.
I have, I'm going to actually have to go look at my nightstand. One of them is The Lost Kingdom, and that is a book. It's Hawaii's Last Queen, the Sugar Kings, and America's First Imperial Adventure.
Okay.
And that one is by Julia Flynn Siller.
Okay.
And the other books I've got on my nightstand, one that was really good, The Founder and the Force Multiplier, which really talks about how important our executive assistants, chiefs of staff, et cetera, are in the success of a leader.
Okay.
And then the other book that I'm partway through now is Robert E. Lee and Me, which you may have read, but essentially talks about our country's history and the way people can have a different perspective of different periods in our history.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fascinating. And exactly like you said, you've got like a leadership, you've got a history, and then you've got a lighter read.
I guess I do. That's right. I need something lighter though. So I was shopping around today. So
yeah. That's what I love about with moving with the military is I try to read books that are set locally to where we are living, because I feel like that almost, like you kind of said, it almost grounds me in the place a little bit, where
it does.
I don't know if you feel this because you're the active duty member, but sometimes I think it's a little bit easier because you guys kind of walk into your job and you have a group of people around you. And so for me, it takes a little bit longer. It's not a knock. It just takes a little bit longer to create a community and find where my people are going to be. Right. But I use books a lot when we first move because it makes me feel like I'm learning and I'm doing something to kind of invest myself into the place while I'm working on creating that social network when we first move.
Absolutely.
So another reason to love books and reading.
There are so many.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious, so I appreciate all that you have given me today.
Absolutely. And mahalo to you. And thank you. It's really incredible. I was excited to hear about your this area of interest and really this forum that you've created to have people gather around a love of reading and really a love of learning. So thank you so much, and continued success to you and your beautiful family.
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words. I love that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Kim Davis and her book flight of books on Victory in World War II, The Power of Diversity and Ingenuity. We'd love to know what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information on today's flight and any other books that we talked about today. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, Especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.